All that drama. Okay, so I'm sitting here with my hands shaking over the typewriter, and I don't even know why I'm doing this. Maybe because if I don't get this out, it'll eat me alive. You ever have a secret so big it feels like it's got teeth, just gnawing at you from the inside? That's this. That's him. Professor Marcus Voss. God, even typing his name makes my chest feel tight. I shouldn't be writing this. I should be forgetting, moving on, being the good girl my parents think I am. But I can't. So here goes. This is the story of how I, 18-year-old Lily Hartman from a town so small everyone knows your grandma's cookie recipe, fell into something complicated with the most magnetic man I've ever met. It started in September, my first month at Midwood College. I'd signed up for intro to drama on a whim, thinking it'd be fun to pretend to be someone else for a change. Turns out, pretending becomes a lot harder when the person directing the pretending is, well, him. Professor Voss was like something out of a movie, tall, with dark hair that always looked like he'd just run a hand through it, and these eyes that kind of burned when he talked about Tennessee Williams or Arthur Miller. The first day, he had us read scenes from A Streetcar Named Desire, and when I played Blanche, he stepped in as Stanley, and his voice dropped to this low, rough tone that made my knees feel wobbly. You need to let the fear show, Lily, he said, leaning in so close I could smell his cologne, something woody, with a hint of smoke. Blanche isn't just scared, she's unraveling. Show me that unraveling. His hand brushed my arm as he adjusted my posture, and I swear I felt it for hours afterward. I kept replaying that moment in my head, the way his fingers lingered just a second too long, the warmth of his breath on my cheek. It was like he'd lit a match inside me, and I didn't know how to put it out. The second time was a week later, after class. I stayed to ask about a monologue, and he closed the door behind us. You have potential, he said, leaning back against his desk, crossing those long legs of his. But you're holding back. What are you so afraid of, I don't know what came over me. I just blurted out, what if I'm not any good? What if everyone sees right through me? He smiled then, a slow, almost secretive smile, and said, oh, Lily. The best performances come from letting the world see the parts you'd rather hide. Then he pushed off the desk and walked over, so close I had to tilt my head up to meet his eyes. Practice this tonight, he said, pressing a copy of Suddenly, Last Summer into my hand, his fingers brushing mine. Pay attention to the way Catherine's desire clashes with her shame. I think you'll understand that. His thumb grazed the inside of my wrist as he let go of the book, and I swear I felt it all the way down to my toes. I went back to my dorm that night and read the play, but all I could think about was the way he'd said, desire, and shame, like he knew exactly what that felt like. Like he was talking about more than just the play. The third encounter was in the library, a week after that. I was bent over a desk, highlighting lines from The Glass Menagerie, when I felt someone stand behind me. I didn't have to look up to know it was him. His cologne, that same smoky wood, washed over me, and my heart started pounding so hard I thought he might hear it. Looking for inspiration, he murmured, leaning down so his mouth was near my ear. I froze, the highlighter slipping in my hand and leaving a bright yellow streak across Amanda's monologue. I stammered, trying to collect myself. He reached past me, his arm brushing against my shoulder, and picked up the book I'd been reading. Tom Wingfield's Restlessness, he said, flipping through the pages. He wants to escape, but he's trapped by duty, by desire, by the people who need him. His voice was low, almost intimate, and when he turned to look at me, his eyes were darker than usual. Don't you ever feel that way, Lily? Trapped by what you're supposed to want? I opened my mouth to answer, but nothing came out. He set the book down, his hand lingering on the desk next to mine, so close our pinkies were almost touching. Meet me in the theater after hours, he said quietly, straightening up. We'll work on your monologue. Properly this time. And then he was gone, leaving me with a racing heart and a smudge of his cologne on my sweater. The theater that night was pitch black except for the emergency exit light glowing red in the corner. I fumbled my way to the stage, my shoes echoing on the wooden floor, and found him sitting in the front row, a single cigarette glowing in his hand. Took you long enough, he said, but there was no edge to it, just a sort of breathless anticipation. He stood up, the cigarette dropping to the floor as he stepped onto the stage. Let's try the scene from Suddenly, Last Summer, he said, closing the distance between us. Catherine is terrified of what she's seen, what she's felt, but she can't keep it hidden. Show me that terror, and that longing. He put his hands on my shoulders, turning me toward the imaginary audience, but his touch lingered, sliding down my arms to my wrists. Your voice shakes when you're scared, he said, his mouth near my ear again. But your body leans in. Like you're begging for something you're too afraid to name. I swallowed hard, feeling his thumbs press into the pulse points on my wrists. Marcus, I whispered, the first time I'd said his name out loud. He tensed, then turned me around so fast I gasped, his hands cupping my face. Don't, he said, his voice rough. Don't say my name like that unless you mean it. But I did mean it. I meant every shaky breath, every heartbeat that felt like it was trying to escape my chest. His eyes searched mine for a second, then he groaned and kissed me, hard, his mouth slanting over mine like he'd been starving for it. I melted into him, my hands clutching the front of his shirt, his tongue sliding against mine, hot and insistent. It was nothing like the gentle brush of his hand in class. This was raw, desperate, like we'd both been holding back too long. His hands slid down to my waist, pulling me against him, and I could feel his hardness through his trousers, making me gasp into the kiss. Is this what you want? He murmured against my neck, biting down gently before soothing it with his tongue. I nodded, unable to speak, too lost in the feel of his hands pushing my sweater up, his fingers skimming the bare skin of my back. Just as his hand reached the clasp of my bra, we heard a door slam in the distance, the janitor, probably, locking up for the night. Marcus jumped back like he'd been burned, running a hand through his hair, his chest heaving. Go, he said, voice tight. Now. Before, but I didn't want to go. I wanted to stay there in the dark, wrapped in his arms, pretending the rest of the world didn't exist. But he was already turning away, picking up his coat, and I knew I had to leave. I stumbled off the stage, my legs shaky, and as I reached the door, he called out softly, Lily? I turned, and in the dim red light, I saw him staring at me like I was a ghost, like I was both the thing he wanted most and the thing that would destroy him. This can't happen again, he said. But we both knew he was lying. The fourth time was a Saturday, and I found a note slipped under my dorm door, no name, just a time and a place, West Wing rooftop, 10 p.m. I almost didn't go. But something in me, curiosity, stupidity, longing, made me put on my coat and sneak out. The rooftop was freezing, the wind cutting through my clothes, but he was there, leaning against the railing, a cigarette in his hand. I wondered if you'd come, he said, blowing smoke into the cold air. I shouldn't have, I said, but my voice was weak. He turned to me, and in the moonlight, his face looked almost dangerous. But you did, he said. Why? I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because the truth was, I'd been thinking about his hands, his voice, the way he looked at me, non-stop for weeks. He took a step closer, and I took one back, until I hit the railing. Scared? He asked, but it wasn't unkind. It was knowing. His hand came up to my face, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear, his knuckles grazing my cheek. I should have pushed him away. I should have run. But I didn't. I just stood there, trembling, as he leaned in, so close his breath was warm on my lips, and said, Tell me to stop, Lily. Now. I didn't tell him to stop. His mouth was on mine again, hungrier this time, his hands sliding down to my hips, lifting me up so I was sitting on the railing, my legs wrapping around his waist. I could feel the cold metal beneath my thighs, the wind whipping my hair, but all I cared about was the way he kissed me, like he was trying to memorize every part of me. His hand slid under my coat, over my blouse, his thumb brushing over my nipple through the fabric, and I moaned into his mouth, arching into him. Shoo, he breathed, laughing softly against my lips. Don't want the whole campus to hear you. But there was a thrill in the danger, in the possibility of being caught. His other hand slid up my thigh, pushing my skirt higher, his fingers teasing the edge of my panties, and I thought I might lose my mind. Just as he started to slip a finger inside me, we heard voices below, 2 campus guards making their rounds. Marcus jumped back quickly, running a hand through his hair, and for a second, he looked almost rattled. "Go," he said, his voice low. "Now. I'll distract them." And that was it. I ran back to my dorm, heart pounding, feeling like I'd just escaped something, or missed something. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I lay awake, replaying the way his fingers had felt, the way he'd laughed against my lips, the danger of almost being caught. It was terrifying and exhilarating, and I wanted more. The 5th encounter was in his office, a rainy Tuesday. He'd asked me to stay after class again, saying he wanted to work on my technique. But when I got there, the door was locked from the inside. He opened it, pulled me in quickly, and locked it again. "They're cutting the drama program budget," he said, but his voice didn't sound worried. It sounded urgent. "Lily, I can't stop thinking about you. I know it's wrong, I know I'm your professor, but," he cut himself off, running a hand down his face. I don't know what made me do it, maybe the rain hitting the window, maybe the way he looked like he was fighting himself, but I stepped forward and kissed him. Just a quick, shaky kiss. But it was like a match striking. He groaned, and then his hands were on me, pulling me closer, his mouth hot and insistent, and I forgot all the reasons this was a bad idea. I forgot about the rules, about my parents, about anything. His hands slid down to my waist, bunching up the fabric of my skirt, and I gasped into the kiss, feeling his hardness against me as he backed me up against his desk. "Is this what you want?" he murmured against my neck, biting gently, making me shiver. "Tell me to stop, and I will." But I didn't want him to stop. I wanted him to keep going, to make me forget every other moment of my life before this. He unbuttoned my blouse slowly, his eyes on mine, as if waiting for me to protest. When I didn't, he pushed it off my shoulders, leaving me in my slip, and swore under his breath. "So beautiful," he said, his thumb brushing over my collarbone, down to the edge of my bra. I should have felt exposed, vulnerable. But I didn't. I felt seen. Wanted. His hand slid around to the small of my back, pulling me against him, and I couldn't help but arch into him, a little moan escaping my lips. That's when he lifted me onto the desk, spreading my legs so he could stand between them, his mouth on my neck, my shoulder, while his hand moved up my thigh, pushing my slip higher and higher. I was vaguely aware of the clock ticking on the wall, of the rain getting heavier, but all I could focus on was him, the way he touched me like he'd been waiting to do this for ages, the way he made me feel like I was the only person in the world. And then, oh, God, his hand was there, pressing against me through my panties, and I thought I might die from the sensation. "Marcus," I whispered, his first name slipping out, and that seemed to undo him. He kissed me again, harder, more desperate, and I knew in that moment that there was no going back. He lifted me up, carrying me to the small couch in the corner, never breaking the kiss. My slip came off, then my bra, and his hands were everywhere, my breasts, my stomach, my thighs, like he couldn't get enough. I fumbled with his tie, his shirt buttons, desperate to feel his skin against mine. When he finally pulled back to take off his shirt, I stared at him, the way the muscles in his chest tensed, the faint scar above his collarbone, and I felt a surge of something, pride, maybe, that I was the one making him lose control. He came back to me, kissing me deeply, his hands sliding into my panties, his fingers finding me wet and ready. I gasped, my hips bucking against his hand, and he groaned, "So responsive, Lily. So perfect." He slid a finger inside me, then another, pumping slowly, his thumb rubbing circles over my clit, and I thought I might explode. I'd never felt anything like this, never knew my body could feel so alive, so wanted. Just as I was on the verge of climax, we heard voices in the hallway, students, probably, passing by after class. Marcus froze, his hands still inside me, his breath hot on my neck. I held my breath, listening to the voices get closer, terrified they'd come in, terrified they'd see us like this, me half naked on the couch, his hand between my legs. But the voices passed by, and Marcus let out a shaky breath, his forehead resting against mine. "We're playing with fire," he said, but he didn't move away. Instead, he started moving his hand again, slower this time, more deliberate, like he wanted to savor every second. But God, I don't want to stop. I didn't want him to stop either. I wrapped my legs around his waist, pulling him closer, and whispered, "Don't." Afterward, after he'd satisfied me completely in ways I'd only dreamed of, after I was lying there in his arms, my clothes in a heap on the floor, he said, "This can't happen again, Lily. You know that, right?" But his voice was hollow, like he didn't mean it. And I didn't want it to end. I wanted to stay in that moment forever, where nothing else mattered except the two of us and the storm outside. But of course, it did happen again. And again. We became experts at stolen moments, quick kisses in the supply closet during intermission, lingering touches in the back of the theater during rehearsals, notes slipped into my textbook that made my heart race. Each time, the risk got higher, the tension more electric. There was one time in the faculty lounge, of all places, he'd pulled me in during a break, locking the door, his hands under my dress as I sat on the edge of the sink, praying no one would come in. Another time, on the roof again, but this time we didn't get interrupted. We stayed there until dawn, wrapped in his coat, watching the sun rise over the campus, talking in whispers about books and dreams and things we'd never told anyone else. But the closest call was during the fall play rehearsals. I was playing the lead in the children's hour, and Marcus was directing. During a scene where my character confesses her love to another woman, he came up behind me, adjusting my posture, his hand lingering on my waist. "More longing," he murmured, so only I could hear. "Less fear." His thumb pressed into the small of my back, sending a shiver down my spine. I tried to focus on my lines, but all I could think about was the way his hand felt, the way his breath felt on my neck. And then, mid-scene, Mrs. Harper, the drama department secretary, walked in. Marcus jumped back like he'd been shocked, but not before she'd seen the way he was standing behind me, the look on his face. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, eyeing us suspiciously. "Just needed to drop off these scripts." Marcus cleared his throat, taking the scripts with a shaky hand. "Thank you, Mrs. Harper," he said, voice too tight. She lingered for a moment, looking between us, before finally leaving. I could feel the sweat on my forehead, the racing of my heart. Marcus turned to me, a tense smile on his face. "Back to work," he said, but his eyes were worried. I knew we'd been lucky that time, that one more second, one more glance, and she might have guessed the truth. Now, every time he walks into a room, I feel like I'm wearing my secret on my sleeve. Every time he talks to another student, I feel a twist of jealousy. And when he avoids my gaze during class, I feel like I'm being punished for something I don't regret, something I can't regret, even though I know it's wrong. Maybe that's the worst part. I don't want to be good anymore. I want more of the way he makes me feel, alive and wanted and dangerous. I know this is a mess. I know I could ruin his career, my reputation, everything. But God, when he touches me, I don't care about any of that. I just care about the way his hands feel, the way he makes me forget to breathe, the way he makes me feel like I'm not just a small-town girl anymore. I guess that's the confession, isn't it? I let myself fall for someone I shouldn't have, and I'd do it again in a heartbeat. Even though I know it'll probably destroy me. Maybe that's the price of feeling something real, though. Maybe some secrets are worth keeping, even if they eat you alive. Maybe the danger, the thrill, the forbidden part of it is what makes it feel so alive. I don't know. All I know is that I can't stop thinking about him, about us, about the way he makes me feel like I'm standing on the edge of a cliff, and the only thing I want is for him to push me over. And maybe that's the scariest part of all.